Good morning, Kahal Kadosh. Shavua Tov u'mevorach to everybody. Today, the 7th day of Menachem Av, corresponding to the 27th day of July 2020. Today's class has been graciously sponsored by our esteemed member and friend, Mr. Edwin Aripol, La'ilui Nishmat, his beloved aunt, Lula Wahba, Mrs. Folla, Bat Miriam, Aliyah Shalom, Iratzonda to the words of Torah, her neshama, have an aliyah in Gan Eden. Amen. So today, I'd like to review perhaps some of the historical background that affected the days of Tisha B'Av that made this day, regretfully, a day in history that had become very challenging for Am Israel. But we would like to begin with the Rambam, 13 principles of faith, and especially the one connected to us that says, Ani ma'amin b'emunah shelema b'biyat HaMashiach, that despite all the adversities and all the catastrophes and all the challenges that Am Israel had to endure and experience throughout our existence from the early stages, yet we have our undivided emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Be'ezat Hashem, the Yeshua will come. And our holy rabbis tell us that definitely there is no greater time in the calendar that for the redemption of Am Israel to happen like these days around and during Tisha B'Av. Let's begin from the early days of Tisha B'Av. Everybody knows the first and second temple were destroyed regretfully on the day of Tisha B'Av. But let's see what else happened on the days of Tisha B'Av before the temples and after the second temple as well. So first, we have the very famous story of the Meragelim, the case in which Moshe Rabbeinu sent the spies and they came back from Israel and they gave a very derogatory report to the land of Eretz Israel, and regretfully that brought the decree that those who came out of Israel, or rather those that came out of Egypt from the age of 20 to 60 will not make it, so to speak. And we all know that Bnei Israel, due to that unfortunate situation, needed to stay in the desert for the 40 years of the Midbar. So that's definitely the one that triggered many of the reactions, so to speak, when it came to the time of Tisha B'Av, as the Pasuk writes, Vayivku ha'am b'layla hahu. So we learned this a few weeks ago in Perashat Shelach. Last week, I mentioned very briefly, which according to some sources, the struggle between Yaakov and Esav took place on the day of Tisha B'Av, the way we quoted Rabbi Chaim Palachi, that connects the day of Tisha B'Av with the prohibition of the consumption of Gid and Nasheh, which is the mitzvah that comes from that particular challenge and struggle between Yaakov and Esav. But let's go quickly to additional incidents that happened on the day or around the day of Tisha B'Av. So I have a list in front of me, and you look at the numbers. Destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash by the Romans, over 2.5 million Yehudim were killed, literally as famine and war and diseases, and over 1 million Yehudim were scattered through the Roman Empire, and 100,000 Yehudim were sold as slaves. So we can imagine the anguish and the pain and suffering that had. And then we have 52 years later, on the day of Tisha B'Av, the city of Betar has been destroyed. That was the famous revolt of Bar Kokhba, a Jewish hero, or a Jewish warrior rather, that, he was very good for the Jewish people, but being humble didn't help him much, completely the opposite. And at the end of the day, he left the world, and that prompted a very tragic moment or incident like the story of the cities of Betar. The city of Betar the Harugei Betar, the way they are known in Jewish history, Vespasianus, that infamous Roman emperor, enacted an edict in which no Jewish body can be buried. And regretfully, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Jewish bodies were exposed for many, many, many years. Thankfully, Baruch Hashem, thank God, Hashem made a miracle for the Jewish people that were alive and the Jewish people that were dead. For the Jewish people that were alive, the miracle was that once Vespasianus passed away, the Jewish people were allowed to bury the dead. And the reason is because in Rome there was a rule, so to speak, that the edicts of the emperors can remain activated as long as the emperor is alive. Once the emperor dies, whatever he decree goes back to the recycling bin, so to speak, which is interesting because in our Torah is completely the opposite. Torah sivalano Moshe morasha kehilat Yaakov. Moshe Rabbeinu may be gone from the world over 3,300 years ago, but yet the pasuk says, Zichru Torah Moshe Abdi. Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant. So Torah Baruch Hashem is different. So the Jewish people were allowed to bury the dead. And I do not have a number, but the Gemara gives a couple of hints of how many, not how many exactly, but definitely may have been between 6 and 7 figures, the casualties of the destruction of the city of Betar. And thankfully, Baruch Hashem, and there are two opinions. One opinion says 22 years after they were dead, they were allowed to be buried. Other opinion says 12 years. But we know that irrelevant of which opinion we follow, even 12 days exposing a dead body on the ground, sooner or later is going to have some type of deterioration. Baruch Hashem, God made a miracle, and the dead bodies were preserved intact, literally, and completely presentable, so to speak, until the moment of their burial. The day, interesting enough, that this edict was abolished was many years later, on the 15th day of Av, known as in Jewish calendar Tu B'Av, which is usually a week after Tisha B'Av, a most memorable day because it's a day that many miracles and wonders happened to Am Israel throughout history, and Baruch Hashem, many happy ending stories. Now, God willing, we are going to relive the mega day of Tu B'Av, the way the Mishnah writes. There was no greater days in the Jewish calendar like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. Stay tuned, Be'ezat Hashem, and we'll talk about it as we're getting closer to that very holy and very, very powerful and special day. Just to add one more before we move forward, that due to the miracle, by the way, that happened with those that were killed in Betar, that eventually they were allowed to be buried, our rabbis, as a token of gratitude, so to speak, to Hashem, they added one more blessing in the Birkat Hamazon. This is called blessing number 4, known as Hatov Behametiv. This blessing actually was established in honor of all the innocent victims that were eventually allowed to be buried. Okay, let's continue. We're moving on. This is already the story of Betar. It happened, based on my chart here, on the year 133, 132 of the Common Era. Then we come few hundred years, perhaps quiet, but then in the year 1095, we have the Crusades, declared by a pope, and 10,000 of these warriors brings death and destructions to thousands of Yehudim, and basically most of the communities of Germany and France are completely gone. regretfully. From there we moved to England. In the year 1290, all Yehudim removed from England. Pogroms, confiscations of property, and Torah books. Not much different than what happened in the time of Ahasuerus, when the Jewish people were about to be removed, literally, physically, ushlalam laboz, and the confiscation of property and all the assets, the way we learned back in the time of Purim. So from England, we moved to Spain and Portugal, that it was up to the year 1492, the same year of the discovery of America. I'm sure you learned that in school by Christopher Columbus. He had the three ships, I believe, La Nina, La Pinta, and La Santa Maria, I believe. I remember that from elementary school, Baruch Hashem. And there are many different opinions who he was actually, if he was a Jew, and Anus, and the people and the tripulants that were with him, the sailors and the people that were with him, they were actually evicted from Spain as being Yehudim, but regretfully, on the year 1492, basically finalizes the removal of all Yehudim from the Iberia Peninsula, that includes Spain and Portugal. And families obviously separated. There was many people died by drowning, by just escaping. And there was a massive loss of assets and property of Am Israel. And we remember, talking about this in the past, that there were not too many choices. One choice was to become a Christian, God forbid, and many Jews did take that option, and that's how we started to learn in Jewish history the topic of the Anusim, the topic of the Moranos, basically undercover Jews, Yehudim that were Jewish people privately, but they looked like Christians and acting like Christians publicly. And they did it basically in order to protect their life. And this is something very common that we hear, especially in Miami, that we have a lot of Spanish influence, as many of them say, yeah, we are descendants of the Marranos. My mother for a whole week used not to eat bread, and my mother for a whole week used to bring fish, and my mother used to hide under the table and look for a candle, with a candle for something, and different things that if we can think for a moment. The week without bread is Pesach, the week without meat is the week of Tisha B'Av, or the 9 days of Tisha B'Av. The candle means searching for the Hametz, or the candle lighting of Shabbat, but obviously from a halakha perspective, there is no way to track down, whatever happened in the past 500 years, but this is basically where the idea came from. Then you have the other Yehudims who literally refuse openly to convert to Christianity, so to speak, and many of them were evicted, and many of them were literally executed. It's called in Portuguese, it's called auto da fé, which in English means an act of faith. Literally, they will give their life al kiddush Hashem, and they will return their holy soul to the Almighty. So basically, so far we don't have a country. England out, France, Germany, Spain out, basically Europe. And then we have later on 1914. But in between, there is one more that did not happen exactly on Tisha B'Av, but it happened a few days before. So far, most of those that I mentioned, they were around the 9th of Av, the 8th of Av, the 10th of Av, on that particular 3-day. But there was another major calamity, God forbid, known as Gezerot Tah Betat. This took place Ukraine, Russia, which is known today, two separate countries, the year 1648, the year 1649. This is called in Hebrew Gezerot Tah Betat. Regretfully, it has to do with the Russians, with the Cossacks, with a rebellion against the landowners. And bottom line, Yehudim always fall in the trap of Gentiles and rioting, etc. And regretfully, it is not different what's happening today. What if you just follow the headline news? Even from the Jewish website, you see how many politicians and how many actors and how many artists and how many sports players. Literally, they are openly talking about anti-Semitism comments and statements, etc. So may Hashem protect us all, that Be'ezat Hashem Mashiach will come very, very soon. But the reality of life, today it became the norm to bash groups and to put down the Yehudim, etc. So in that time of Gezerot Tahbetat, hundreds upon thousands upon hundreds of thousands of Yehudim were killed, were massacred, out of respect of the Kahal, will not share the aggression and the unbelievable amount of pain and suffering that our forefathers endured in this particular decree. There were many Hachamim and Talmidei Hachamim that were literally murdered by these Cossacks. One of them, probably you remember, I spoke about him a few days ago, the great Rabbeinu Shimshon Meostropoli, which I mentioned about him on the special prayer before Pesach and the 42-step journey that we discussed the other day in his honor, in his memory. Actually, he was one of the casualties of that fateful day, the third day of Menachem Av, together with 300 of the greatest Hachamim of that generation, of that country, that were students of Rabbeinu Shimshon Meostropoli. They all were executed in the synagogue, God forbid. And the word execution is a mild word compared to what the story tells us what exactly transpired, but let's not go too much into that. Then we have the Inquisition we spoke about 1648, 1649. Then we have on the day of Tisha B'Av in the year 1914, Russia and Britain declare war on Germany. That marks the beginning of the First War. There were over 120,000 Yehudim that died in the army. There were 400 pogroms against the Jewish people in Hungary, in Ukraine, in Poland, and in Russia. And eventually, since the issues of the First War were not solved, regretfully, a couple of years later, the Second War comes, and regretfully, the famous chapter of the Holocaust that is affecting mankind till today, and as the years go by, there are less and less survivors of the Holocaust for obvious issues of longevity, but regretfully, on 1942, the deportations from the ghetto of Warsaw to Treblinka and other concentration camps began. And we remember vividly when we discuss about this topic of Yom HaShoah, that in the day of the Holocaust Memorial, that regretfully 6 million are the numbers that we were told, but regretfully, according to some historians, the numbers were a bit higher, and definitely if we put together all the Gentiles and all the other nations and ethnic groups that were also removed by the Germans, God forbid, so the number is definitely larger as well. But bottom line, even the loss of one human life is considered too many, since we understand that every person is a whole world by themselves. Then we have the day of Tisha B'Av, 1989. Many of us remember the Kuwait War, Iraq and Kuwait. The day that Iraq walked out of talking to Kuwait was actually the day of Tisha B'Av, which eventually brings us to the modern day history known as the Gulf War. And we remember vividly how many Scud missiles were sent into the land of Israel, and Baruch Hashem, a million times, obviously, God performed mega miracles, and thank God there was literally not much damage to the loss of physical life. There was physical damage, but physical damage is repairable when it comes to replacing a human life. And last but not least, and I hope that I don't have more to add, but especially our members and our audience from South America, Argentina, on Motza'e Tisha V'Av. There was the blowing up of basically the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, Argentina. On that day, that was Motza'e Tisha V'Av, 86 people died and over 300 wounded, literally in the center of the Jewish neighborhood of Once, where back then there was the largest concentration of Yehudim in that area. Today, Baruch Hashem, the community expanded to the outskirts of the main city, but bottom line, the common denominator that all of these things are happening are all surrounded the month of Av, and especially the key days on and around Tisha V'Av. And the question is, why? So the why that I'm asking is all about the dates. So I believe that I mentioned this in today's earlier class after the Minyan, that we learn the following. Number one, like there is the essence of a person, of being a good person or being not a good person, etc. Also in the aspect of days, there is such a thing as well. That the essence of the day has the power of making the day a great day or a challenging day. What does it mean? Of course, we have faith and we have emunah that Be'ezat Hashem, all the days will be wonderful, will be great, will be special, will be happy, full of blessing, etc. But on the other hand, what the halakha says, in the beginning of the month of Av, if a Jew has a court case with a Gentile, it is better to postpone it till after Tisha V'Av. Why? Short answer, because the mazal is down. So somebody asked this question earlier today in the class, and the question was, I don't understand, Rabbi, don't we say Israel lema'ala min mazal, that the mazal and Israel don't affect each other? So yes, there is such a thing, but we need to understand a couple of things. Number one, there is individual mazal for a particular person. Number one. Number two, that the day has a mazal. What does it mean? Every day of the week has a different mazal. And for example, let's talk about tomorrow, Tuesday. Okay? Everybody knows Tuesday, it's known in the Torah, Pa'amayim ki tov. What does that mean, Pa'amayim ki tov? Double good. Tov la-shamayim, tov la-beriyot. Good for mankind and good for spiritual matters. And the reason is because on the third day of the creation, which was the completion of day number 2 of the creation, twice the Torah says tov, good. And therefore we say Tuesday is a great day to start things, great day to move, a great day to purchase, in other words, everybody understands that Tuesday, etc. So what do we understand? That also the mazal of Tisha V'Av, because as I read from the synagogue's newsletter, which can be found on the front page of the synagogue's website, www.ejsfl.com, there you're going to see the historical background of what happens during and around the days of Tisha V'Av. So the question that somebody may ask is, but hold on, Rabbi, if that's the case, we can never expect that this is going to change? The short answer is yes. Everything can be changed. The truth of the matter is that it can be changed. And I believe when we learned together a week ago the introduction of the Ben Ish Hai to Perashat Devarim, he quotes the particular pasuk from the book of Tehillim that says, Samechenu kimot einitanu. Samechenu, bring us happiness, kimot, like the days, einitanu, of our hardship. What does it mean? That yes, the day, God forbid, it's attributed to be part of a chain reaction of many tragedies throughout the generations. But guess what? It's not forever. God is forever. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Imloch, Le'olam Va'ed. That concerning God. There is a pasuk from the book of Iyov, I believe, that says, Ketz Sam Lahoshech. Darkness also has a deadline. Darkness, Ketz, finishing, conclusion of time. Sam, place, Lahoshech, to darkness. You know, there was a story of a fellow, very successful fellow, who I think he lived in Iraq, in the Middle East. And once he ordered a ring. And he will wear this ring, and occasionally will look at the ring. What did he do with this ring? He sent the ring to the jeweler, and he says, do me a favor, I want you to write, or to engrave, that's a proper word, to engrave in the ring the following 3 words. Gam ze ya'avor. Also this shall pass. Okay, the guy receives the ring and he shows it to his friend. Look at the beautiful ring I just sent to make. And then the friend sees these 3 words. And he said, what is the meaning of this? Is it a gula? Is it a kemia? It says no. Whenever I feel down, whenever I feel depressed, or whenever I see that things are not heading in the right direction, and I start to become worried and concerned, I look at my ring and I remind myself, Gam ze ya'avor, that also shall pass. In other words, that there is a deadline when the darkness and the challenge will disappear. We don't know that deadline, how long it is, but definitely will disappear. And he also said that when he feels that he's on top of the world, and he feels that he's a macher, and he feels that he's Superman, and he feels that he's able to do whatever he pleases because he has a tremendous amount of success and wealth, then he looks at the ring and it says, Gam ze ya'avor. You know, also these can come down. So therefore, the lesson that this fellow was telling his friend is that he counts the blessings of every day. But he knows that there is sunrise after sunset. And that is in a way what our rabbis teach us in these very holy days of Tisha B'Av. And they are holy days. These are not my words. These are the word of Megillat Echa. We're going to be reading, maybe not, but in theory, Wednesday night and Thursday morning, the Megillah written by Yirmiyah HaNavi, the Jeremiah the prophet. And how does he call the day of Tisha B'Av? Kara alai mo'ed. He calls it a day of celebration. Mo'ed means like Hol HaMo'ed. Not only that, our rabbis establish a halacha that says that on the day of Tisha B'Av, you don't say Tahanunim, you don't say Anna, you say Yehishem. Why Yehishem? You should say double Anna. It's a short answer. Because we have so much emunah that day will be reversed. Guaranteed that it will be reversed. This year, Be'ezat Hashem, listen, with everything that's going around us, I think that the only one that can save us is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the only one that saves us constantly. But there are some scenarios that Hashem sends Shaliach, a messenger, as the Gemara writes, Harbe Sheluchim Lamakom. There are many messengers to the Almighty, meaning to say that Borei Olam can send the Yeshua, God can send the salvation to the person through many different vehicles. But the Mishnah, the famous Mishnah in Masechet Sotah, tells us, after giving us a lineup of some of the challenging moments that the world will endure prior to Mashiach's arrival, and some of them are already happening in front of us, the Mishnah at the end concludes, En lanu al mi lehisha'en, ella al avinu shebashamayim. We have no one to rely upon but upon our fathers in the heavens. For this reason, our great Hachamim establish many different traditions and many different halachot concerning the days prior to Tisha B'Av, which many of them we already reviewed. For example, not taking hot showers, not eating meat, not drinking wine, avoiding situations, God forbid, that can bring danger, even buying things if a person really doesn't need them, or a person can order it today, will get here next week, and you get a special price, etc. But you understand what I'm saying? That a lot of the stuff that we do usually for these days, what the Halacha is telling us, do me a favor, take a step back. The question is, why? And I think the answer is that without having these halachot, which are applicable to our days, how will we be able to remember the Bet HaMikdash or the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash? You know, the Gemara mentioned that through the years, Chachamim wanted to take upon themselves and giving them over to Am Israel certain restrictions of things that we are able to do today, if it's music or if it is eating meat or if drinking wine, etc. And obviously was not approved because it's very difficult to do such a thing for Am Israel. But bottom line, we see even in weddings that when the Hatan finishes the Shiva Berachot, the Chuppah finishes with the Shiva Berachot, what does the Hatan do? Im eshkachech Yerushalayim. He breaks a glass in honor to remember the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. And many people, B'simen Tov, U'mazal Tov, B'simen Tov, they start singing as soon as the glass is broken. And I tell you one thing, it's not the proper procedure. Because you say Mazel Tov for the destruction of the temple. That's why you'll see in many weddings, and I've seen this in action, that the Hatan, with the blessing and permission of the Kala, they will tell the orchestra, please don't play. They will make an announcement. For 30 seconds, let us all have a moment of silence, of thinking about the Bet HaMikdash, thinking about God, thinking about the condition of the world. It is not a mandatory halacha to activate what I'm just saying, but I'm only just creating an awareness what is going on out there. For example, in Israel, the tradition is in many Sephardic synagogues that the Hatan's forehead is they put some ashes on the forehead of where the tefillin goes, and that's where he says, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim, also the sign of mourning. Why do we do this? Number one, during the moment of a wedding, I believe the simple answer will be that a moment of a wedding, it's usually one of the happiest moments on a person's life. And maybe the Halacha is telling us, even though that is your happiest day, remember that like you want to be happy, God also wants to be happy. And God is not happy because we are in Galut. And that is the reason why also it says that Kol HaMesameach Hatan Bekala, a person that brings happiness to the groom and the bride, is compared like if the person has rebuilt one of the ruined homes of Jerusalem. Now, why the mitzvah of making happy Hatan and Kala is like you're rebuilding a small portion of Jerusalem? I think the answer is very simple, that because destruction brings sadness, every time a Jewish couple gets married, we are rebuilding Am Israel. And that's what we say in the Beracha of the Shiva Berachot, Binyan Adeh Ad, an everlasting edifice. So therefore, if it's everlasting edifice, destruction, construction. As it says, if a person ruins, the person also can fix and rebuild. As we discussed yesterday in the different steps of exercises, a person can talk and can react, or stay quiet and not to react. A person can give people the benefit of the doubt, or a person can judge people in a very strong manner. Bottom line, we have the power of change, we have the power to reverse, and we have the power, Be'ezat Hashem, with our constant growth and self-improvement, to be able to change the darkness that is surrounding these unfortunate days and turn them into days of happiness and joy for all of Am Israel. Yiratzon that the words of Torah elevate the neshama to Mrs. Lula Wahba, Fola Bat Miriam Aliyah Shalom, dear aunt of our esteemed member and friend, Mr. Edwin David Aripol from Italy. We say to him again, Tiskela Misvot, for generously sponsoring today's class. Regretfully, for different reasons, we will not be able to have today the 11 a.m. Mishnah Pirkei Avot class, nor tomorrow the Spanish 10:30 class, but Be'ezat Hashem, we will have the 9:15 in the morning class. Have a great day, everybody. Shavua Tov u'mevorach to everyone.